Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the regular council meeting for Monday, March 5th, 2018. I want to first recognize that we're holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry, and we do have a scheduled recess for 9 p.m. Before we get started, I wish to make a statement with respect to guidelines for council meeting decorum. Council, the Chair, CAO, and City Clerk each have roles and responsibilities at public meetings. Specifically, the Mayor or Acting Mayor as Chair has the authority and duty to take all measures necessary to ensure meetings comply with the Community Charter, Council Procedure Bylaw, and workplace laws. Council meetings are open to the public and are both a political and democratic forum and a workplace. Council duties are to ensure that members of the public have a reasonable opportunity to express their views or concerns. Proper rules of order are: 1. Only one speaker at a time will have the floor as directed by the chair of the meeting. Please do not interrupt or call out comments while another has the floor. Anyone speaking out or without having been acknowledged by the chair will be found out of order. If that person does not refrain from speaking without having been acknowledged by the chair, then he or she will be required to leave. For the members of the public speaking, the comments need to be respectful and constructive. Discriminatory or defamatory comments or comments that are in the nature of harassment will not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in such communications will be found out of order. If a speaker is found to be out of order and does not refrain from that commentary, then the speaker will be required to leave. This is a public meeting, so all comments can be considered publication. With respect to harassment, in terms of comments about city employees, employees of the City of Nanaimo have a right not to be subjected to discriminatory or defamatory comments or personal attacks against their competency or character. All speakers must refrain from such comments about identifiable staff. Comments should be limited to issues regarding the city's policies or operations. 2. Discriminatory comments. Section 7 of the Human Rights Code prohibits a discriminatory publication because of the race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religion, marital status, family status, physical or mental disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or age. Discriminatory comments will not be tolerated. And finally, defamation is publication about a person that tends to hurt the person's reputation. Defamatory comments will not be tolerated. Please stick to known facts and keep the dialogue respectful and constructive. Thank you very much. So, introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the addendum this evening is just the addition of a scheduled recess at 9 p.m., as well as we're adding agenda item 16A, which is a request from Councillor Yoakum, reconsideration of development variance permit application number DVP 335191 King Road. That's it, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
Going over the harassment and derogatory comments and things like that, I guess you'll never apologize for that March 31st letter with the derogatory comments to us and the discriminatory harassment that you wrote out to Ms.
Councillor, you're out of order.
Oh, but so you won't apologize?
Councillor, you're out of order.
Okay. Just wanted to know that you can be discriminatory and harassment.
Councillor, you're out of order.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next one. Any other items? Okay, I have a late item, and that is with respect, and I will get into it in the Mayor's report, to sending a letter to Selina Robinson, the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And I'd like to have that added under 16B, please. Thank you. So, well, just a moment. We have to do mine, the additional items. So, Councillor Yoakum is moving that he would like to have an additional item added. So, we need a seconder on that. Seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. On mine, with respect to the letter to Minister Robinson, to bring it to the agenda. Seconded? Thank you. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. So, now for a motion to adopt the agenda as amended. Moved by Councillor Bestwick, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Move the minutes of February 5th. Thank you. The minutes for February 5th have been moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move the minutes of February 8th.
Moved. Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Hahn. Thank you. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item is the Mayor's report. So I addressed my Mayor's report tonight to the citizens of Nanaimo. We find ourselves in a very unusual situation of late, and I wish to address how the corporation intends to ensure the work of City moves forward and to answer questions with respect to specifically, quote, who do we turn to as it relates to important management functions, unquote. I offer the following. Council is doing its best to deal with these sensitive personnel matters as promptly as possible and will keep the public updated as much as they can. Due to privacy laws, we will not provide further comment on specific individuals. Secondly, in the short term, the City is being led by a committee of experienced senior staff involving those positions that reported directly to the CAO, and the committee has things well in hand. We anticipate addressing leadership roles in the near future. Thirdly, Council would like to acknowledge and thank City of Nanaimo staff for their resilience, commitment, and high level of service. And finally, that we have the legislative positions required under the community charter. Ms. Gurry is the corporate officer and Ms. Laura Mercer is the deputy financial officer, positions appointed annually by Council. We must now turn to the community charter for further direction with respect to important inquiries by members of Council. The Mayor, under Section 116 of the Charter, has, in addition to other responsibilities, a Council member the following: to provide on behalf of the Council general direction to municipal officers respecting implementation of municipal policies, programs, and other directions of Council. I would respectfully ask that Council forward inquiries to staff that may involve a degree of work to be undertaken through the Mayor's office. I will then seek the consent of Council to proceed with the inquiries, only forwarding those that receive the support of the majority of Council. The second item I'd like to bring forward tonight is the modular housing initiative by the province of British Columbia. The day after this Council voted not to place a modular housing unit at 1425 Cranberry Avenue, a representative of the Ministry advised local media that the Ministry was anxious to work with the City to see the project through. To date, our senior staff have not been able to receive any such commitment directly from the Ministry. We find it difficult to move ahead without that commitment. I propose tonight that I write a letter under the Mayor's signature to ask the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to give the City of Nanaimo an opportunity to seek and secure alternate sites for the proposed housing. We need to adequately consult our community, secure the property if required, and make necessary zoning and official community plan amendments where necessary. These necessary steps are guided by both Council's wish to engage with our citizens and dictated by provincial legislation. I believe the community and Council are all aware of the provincial government's desire to have these units up and occupied by the end of 2018, and we certainly intend to do everything possible to achieve that goal. We simply ask that the province work with us and our citizens to ensure people in our community can be helped with this very necessary housing. Consideration of this item will come under Agenda 16B of tonight's agenda. Thank you very much. So the next item is under administration. The first item is under the Advisory Committee minutes, and the first one is to be introduced by Councillor Kipp.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, Your Worship. I actually wasn't at the meeting on the 16th. It was chaired by Councillor Brennan, who is away tonight. I'd like to move the Community Planning and Development Committee meetings held on Tuesday, September 19th, 2017 at 5 o'clock.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councillor Hong. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries.
So again, the minutes of the Community Planning and Development Committee meeting held Tuesday, December 19th, 2017 at 5 o'clock. I'll introduce those to be read.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. The next one is community recommendations with respect to the Finance and Audit Committee for February 14th, to be introduced by Councillor Beswick.
Thank you. The Finance and Audit Committee is represented by the entire membership of this council and mayor. It was moved at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting that council approved the 2018 downtown event grant funding recommendations of $150,000. And I don't believe that it's incumbent to read out the 20-plus recipients, but if it is deemed necessary by our legislative clerk, I will do that.
Not necessary. Second. So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Hung?
Thank you. Through you to staff. Mr. Lindsay, I know that we traditionally give away the entire money in the beginning of the year, but what we find ourselves in some situations is that an event does come forward that we need money for, that we run out. For example, the kids conference that's happening this weekend because of their deadline, or they didn't make this list. Is there any way that in the following coming up years that you can maybe hold back 5% or something as a contingency for us to use for other events? Is that a possibility?
Through your worship to Councillor Hung, certainly that's a possibility if that was council's direction.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beswick.
Thank you. Just in terms of over the years and the many years, I've asked on similar reports like this that this is the recommendation for 2018. I've asked for the column for 2017 and even the column for 2016, so that we would have, so more than us, the people that pay attention would know what it was last year and the year before. So I would just, without making a motion, I would just ask staff, please take into consideration adding the previous year's awards of money. And I think that would be helpful to the people that have applied and didn't receive what they asked for or otherwise. And I know for myself personally, I think it would be helpful. So I would appreciate if you could keep that in mind for the people next year. Thank you.
Thank you. I concur with Councillor Beswick with respect to that. The two items. One is the publishing of the previous years, years, and also Councillor Hong's request with respect to holdback. When would we make such motions? Ms. Curry.
Your Worship, I would suggest that you would make this motion at the next Finance and Audit Committee, where the money is considered at that time and the motion is made by the Finance and Audit Committee. That would be a good time to bring up those motions.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Is anybody else wanting to speak before me? It's my second term.
Councillor Thorpe is on the list.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hong. Just to clarify my memory and for the benefit of listeners through you, Chair, to Mr. Lindsay, my understanding is that these applicants will be required to file a event report following their event, indicating things such as attendance and costs, and basically giving us feedback on how this money was spent. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship, and that would be required before next year's submission is made.
And I think that's eminently fair. Thank you very much.
Yep. Councillor Hong?
Thank you. Just to follow up on Councillor Thorpe's thing, do we have an economic impact of what this did for last year? Because this is the second year now that we've had this program. So I know that we gave out roughly $130,000. Do we know what the return on that investment was?
Yes, Your Worship, that we have those reports. I would note that not all of the events that are receiving funding this year were events that were held last year, so there are some consistencies, but there's certainly some new different proposals there. But certainly for the events that were held in 2017, yes, those have been received.
Great. And when will we, or the public, will get to see those numbers, I guess? That's the question.
I believe some of that information was shared with council previously, but we can certainly bring that back to the Finance and Audit Committee.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Kipp.
Yeah, I've talked about this before. I think most of the groups, or all the groups on here, try and do a lot of stuff for the community. It's amazing. I know I participated in a number of them, or was at a few of them just to see what was going on. I think they're excellent. I guess what we don't have on council is a multiplier effect. So when we say we're giving out, say, Gingerbread Homes $6,000, what do we get for that, or what do we expect? And I think that's something we've always tried to say. You always hear when money gets spent in tourism that it has a multiplier effect of so many dollars. And we don't seem to have that with this, although lots of it's relating to people coming into town. On the holdback issue, I believe our staff, when we do give money on these grants or event applications, and if they're renting city stuff, I think our city holds back the amount or the deposit for the room rentals and that, and then just prior to the rooms being rented, they would request the rest of the money. So I understand we do hold back some if they are renting our facilities, but I'm not certain of that. But maybe we could look into that another time. But the multiplier effect to me is an important one. Like when the Downtown Mural Festival, it's what does it add to our community? How do you judge what art does to our downtown core or the festival for it? So it's a tough one. You can say the night market produces so many people downtown. So we need some of these figures to sometimes determine what are valuable. Because I know the Marine Festival has been great in the last years. It's been phenomenal. More people attending. The Nanaimo has been successful. So I think it's important. I wonder why sometimes, though, the Father's Day in the Park gets zeros, or men's events have complained before they don't get the stuff, right? But I appreciate the fact that these people are putting on a lot of events in our community.
Okay. Mr. Lindsay, were you wanting to respond to? Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Yoakum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question to yourself, to Mr. Lindsay, would be with your changes that we've done in the last year and a half or so, has events declined statistically, or being a part of, we incorporated more events as a recent? Thank you.
So, Your Worship, speaking from our experiences just in the last 2 years that we've been running this program, initially the budget was, I believe it was $118,000, if I recall, in 2017. 2018, Council agreed to increase the funding to $150,000, and that was partly because the number of events that we were seeing requested. So definitely there's an increased demand, and even with the $150,000, we were not able to respond to every request and suggestion for events in 2018.
Just quickly supplement, if I may. So with the now defunct DNBIA, the events have not slacked. So the events are still being held with the same budget, or actually increased budget. Is that what I'm hearing?
I believe the original budget in 2017 was based on the equivalent monies that were being provided previously to DNBIA. And those monies, you're correct, were increased. In terms of the overall number of events compared to the city, since the city's been providing these grants versus previous, I don't have those stats in front of me.
Thank you. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is road closure, part of Beetle Road and land exchange at 111 Roberta Road East. To be introduced by Mr. Dale Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, this is to obtain council approval for proposed road closure of that part of Beetle Road in exchange for parkland at 11 Roberta Road East. Maybe just to assist in the discussion, I'd ask that if you're ahead of me already, page 27 be pulled up on the screen. Thank you. So just a little bit to talk about. So the portion off of Beetle Road right now is dedicated road, which would allow for access into the subject property from this side. The majority of the property, as you can see here, the subdivision lot area is going to be accessed from Roberta Road East. There's a significant wetland and environmentally sensitive area in the park. There is some area that's potential for development. So the area that's in the dark hatch that's labeled as park is area where potential development could occur. What we're proposing here is to do a land exchange for additional park dedication and exchange for closing that portion of road dedication and essentially transferring the density from that park area out into the road. We believe it would result in a development that's more consistent with the pattern in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Lindsay before we move on to the motion? Thank you very much. Councillor Yocum, for the recommendations.
Yes. A motion that council authorize the road closure and disposition of portion of Beetle Road adjacent to 11 Roberta Road East and direct staff to enter into a road closure and land exchange agreement.
It's moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion that council direct staff to proceed with the public notice for the closure and disposition of a portion of Beetle Road.
Moved by Councillor Yocum and seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion that highway closure and dedication and removal bylaw 2018 number 7258 to provide for highway closure and dedication and removal of a portion of Beetle Road adjacent to 11 Roberta Road East. Pass first reading.
Moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Discussion. Seeing none, call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion that highway closure and dedication and removal bylaw 2018 number 7258 pass second reading.
Moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. The next one is development permit number DP 1059 at number 10 Buttertubs Drive, to be introduced by Mr. Dale Lindsay. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is for a development permit for a 156-unit affordable housing project for seniors. This is a project that has received funding from BC Housing. The project itself does include variances, including a height variance from 14 meters to 18.5, a front yard setback variance from 6 meters to 0, and landscaping to the variances to the minimum landscaping requirements under the bylaw. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Lindsay. Reading the report, I wasn't quite clear if this proposed development, would affect the current clubhouse or community centre, which is on one end of that property.
Yes, Your Worship. The clubhouse will need to be removed, and ultimately the facilities provided in the clubhouse will be reconfigured and accommodated in the new building.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone prepared to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Thorpe, seconded by Councillor Hong. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favour? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is development variance permit number DVP 337 at 5341 Dunster Road. Again, to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is the subject property may be familiar to Council as it has been before Council in the past. It was previously rezoned, and at the time of the rezoning it was identified that the subsequent variance would be required. And there was also a previous development variance permit for the same request that's before you this evening. That development variance permit is good for 2 years, and it has expired prior to the subdivision moving forward. The applicants have indicated that they are now interested in proceeding with this 2-lot subdivision, and as such are seeking the lot variances for Lot A from 28 meters to 25.54 and Lot B from 28 meters to 24.29.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Bestwick.
Do we have any speakers?
We do.
Then I'll...
Okay. It's requested that Council hear anyone wishing to speak with regard to DVP 337 at 5341 Dunster Road. Anyone wishing to speak to it? For the second time? And for the third and final? Then Councillor Bestwick.
I'll just ask Mr. Lindsay, when the first application expires, and then we go into the, regardless that it's the same ownership group or otherwise, does the period of time that they have to exercise their permit, remain at 2 years, 1 year? How long do they have now to exercise the option to proceed with their subdivision?
So under legislation, the permit's good for 2 years. So in that time, they need to substantially commence with the subdivision of the property.
So they didn't take action in the first 2 years, they didn't take action in the first 2 years, and so this is just simply a renewal for 2 more years to subdivide that lot.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Bestwick, seconded by Councillor Kipp. Any further discussion? Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Like the one that we had a couple of weeks ago, how do we know that they're going to be moving forward with this, or other than putting up a for sale sign on it? Do we have any assurances that they're going to build?
Ultimately, Your Worship, through to Councillor Hong, ultimately I cannot provide you those assurances. What I can say is that they've resubmitted their subdivision application and are moving forward. And as part of that approval process, they're required to get development variance permit from council. So their stated intention to us has been to move forward with this application.
And then just to follow up on that, does it have to be 2 years, or can we limit this application?
Your Worship, it's standard 2 years, but I believe council could provide a shorter period of time if so desired.
Thank you, because that's what I would like to prefer. This has already been 2 years, giving them another 2 before. I'm willing to give them a year for development variance. If they're going to proceed forward, then we should know.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I don't really have a tremendous amount of issue with what Councillor Hong is saying. We do have a motion on the floor right now, and unless it's amended. But this might be for a different conversation to say if there's a development permit that has been expired for 2 years, and in a bigger picture conversation, that the next extension would be for a 50% period if it's the same ownership group. I think there's much more conversation to have without just sort of doing this on the fly right now. But I do think it warrants consideration for more conversation moving forward, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Ms. Curry.
Thank you, Worship. I was just basically going to say what Councillor Bestwick has just said, and that I hesitate doing that on the fly, and maybe it's something for further discussion at another time.
Thank you. Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, I would hesitate to do that right now myself. I know of a property up on Victoria Road that has finally started development after easily a decade or more. But I do see what you're talking about, and I think we should discuss this at a future date.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is development variance permit application number DVP 339 at 383 Hillcrest Avenue, and it's to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a development variance permit on the subject property to reduce the side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 1.44 meters, a variance of 6 centimeters. The subject property received a building permit application in the spring of last year to construct a detached carriage house. The initial survey of the foundation indicated it was within the setbacks. However, the following siting survey indicated this minor encroachment into the setback, and as such, the applicants are seeking a variance in order to proceed with a final for the building permit.
Thank you. Is there a now it's directed to council here. Anyone wishing to speak regarding DVP 339 at 383 Hillcrest? For the second time and for the third and final time. Seeing none, is someone prepared to move the recommendation? Second. Moved by Councillor Hong, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. Discussion. Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next one is development cost charge bylaw 2017 number 7252 to be introduced by Mr. Lindsay, Director of Community Development. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. As outlined in the report, we're recommending that the third reading of the proposed new development cost charge bylaw be rescinded, and then it be revised and adopted at third as amended. The situation here, as Council is aware, with development cost charge bylaws, they're required to be referred to the province for approval. During the review of our bylaw and our DCC program, the province identified concerns with projects that were included for parks DCCs. As a result, staff have removed those projects and the associated capital costs of those projects, and as a result, the DCC rates go down for parks DCCs and overall for all residential development cost charges. So the revised bylaw is before you. If it receives third reading this evening, it will return to the province for their approval, and then upon the approval of the province, return to council for adoption. In addition to the rates, I should also note that the initial implementation date for the bylaw was March 1st. Obviously, we're past that time now. The revised bylaw anticipates an implementation date of April 2nd or upon adoption of the bylaw by council, whichever occurs last. Thank you.
Thank you. Is anyone prepared to put the motion?
Motion.
Okay.
Any individual or?
Yes.
Okay, move third reading of development cost charge bylaw 2017 number 7252 to impose development cost charge when the city of Nanaimo be rescinded.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Kipp and seconded by Councillor Thorpe.
Question?
Discussion. Councillor Hong.
Thank you through you to staff. Where are we going to get that money for our parks? Now that we've lost all this DCC money that we had planned for parks, where is that money going to come from to proceed forward with those budgets?
So that would have to come from general revenue. So what I would say, though, is that each of these projects had an allocation that was for both growth and for existing. So that portion of those projects that was previously allocated to come from growth would need to come from taxation, general revenue.
Thank you.
Councillor Beswick.
Thank you. Similar to Councillor Hong's question on page 66, attachment B, Mr. Lindsay, there's 7 projects, DCC projects listed, and they aren't quote-unquote parks. They are equipment. They are, in some cases, so upgrades, gyro 4 fields. So it's not traditionally like park or recreation or open space. It's bleachers, 10 sets, et cetera, et cetera. So will this have a negative impact? Were we planning to have any of these 7 items, for example, included in our 2018 financial plan?
So the impact, Your Worship, and I'm honestly not sure if any of these are currently in your 5-year capital plan, but if they were, funding for the projects could not be supported through development cost charges. And you're correct. I should have noted these are specifically for park improvement projects. There's still park acquisition DCCs which are included within the DCC program.
Thank you. And so just to follow up, as I may, is this an exhaustive list of? I assume that these 7 have been identified because they may have been in our 5-year financial plan that we're doing like 2018 to 2022. Otherwise, why would they be included in this report if they were 2023 or 6 years from now?
So, Your Worship, there's sort of 2 things there. So the development cost charge bylaw looks at a 25-year horizon. So it anticipates projects that would be required to support growth within that time frame. So there may be projects in the DCC list of projects which are outside your capital plan. The other point I wanted to make is there's a number of parks DCC projects that are included or that were used to calculate the current DCCs. These are the projects that were identified by the province as not being eligible. So these are the projects that will be removed and result in a reduction in the parks DCCs.
Thank you. I find this extremely important and really interesting and very complex because it's a lot of money. And it's a lot of money to apply to projects that have, the monies have been collected from development in order to create opportunities for those developments to participate in enhance and upgraded when we grow our city, which was primarily the purpose for DCCs in the first place. So now, if we can't use those DCC monies to enhance our recreational or facility opportunities or culture opportunities or whatever they are associated with these subject matters and more, I'm sure there's more, then in order to upgrade Gyro 4 fields with artificial turf in today's dollars of $1.26 million, in 4 or 5 years from now will be $1.8 or $2 million. And so, because those, I assume, are in today's dollars. So when I hear we have a 25-year DCC plan for projects such as these that now we're being told aren't eligible, it puts a huge strain just in this one area alone on our taxpayers. Our growth annually of 1,000 people won't come anywhere near to pay for these kinds of things and beyond. So when I hear 25 years, then we have facilities that are already beyond they're past their due date, let alone just some touch-ups for $25,000, $22,000 for bleachers. So I think this is really, really concerning, and I don't know where the monies are going to come from with 1,000 more people, 500 more houses a year that we have on average, 400. Thank you.
Councillor Kett.
Oh, no. Well, if we're on this topic, it's $18.5 million approximately with 7 projects, but not all of that will be covered by DCCs. What would be the percentage portion? Can you give me a quick estimate? This shows a list of 18.5 million, but that would not all be covered by DCC project. DCC project on this would be, do you have an approximation?
Your Worship, I'm going to give you a high level estimate because it varies greatly from project to project, but I would say the estimate would be 50%. 50%.
15 is DCC.
50%.
So $9 million. $9 million we'd be short on what we've planned for. Thank you, Councillor Bestwick. I appreciate that thought.
Councillor Yoakum.
Thank you. Yeah, this is quite alarming because those are good projects that should fall into DCC. I'm just wondering, for yourself to staff, Mr. Lindsay, is there an appeal mechanism, a way we could lobby our MLAs? We are in the presiding government's ridings. Is there a way we could, instead of just saying, you know what, the provincial government said, no, these don't qualify? So is there anywhere we can knock or at least try to before just accepting?
And Your Worship, maybe I'd start with answering that and saying it comes from an interpretation of the Local Government Act. And unlike many of the other categories of DCCs, the legislation includes a list of what's eligible for parks DCCs. So it says things like fencing, landscaping, drainage and irrigation, trails, restrooms, change rooms, playground, and playing field equipment. So you can see it based on that list I've read out. There's a number of things in here that staff were of the belief that could apply. So a policy decision at the provincial level is, for example, play fields that are grass could be DCC eligible, but a play field that is done in artificial turf is not eligible. That's not clearly spelled out in the legislation, but that's a policy determination at the provincial level. So yes, I think council could decide to raise this issue provincially, but that would, I would suggest, significantly delay the adoption of your DCC bylaw, which we've already been delayed on a number of times, and I would encourage council to proceed with the amendment, but keep separate this discussion for our future 5-year review if it was important.
Thank you. I see no further speakers. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillor Bestwick opposed. Motion carries.
I move that the development cost charge bylaw 2017 number 7252 to impose development cost charges when the City of Nanaimo pass third reading as amended.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillor Bestwick opposed. Motion carries. While we're on this subject, before you go away, Mr. Lindsay, I wanted to ask the clerk a question, and that is with respect to motions to UBCM, resolutions to UBCM. I would like to see us put forward a resolution centered specifically around this and contributions on rezoning with respect to park contributions, and that we do that in ample time for the September convention. But do you believe that we would be opposed by the UBCM because we haven't taken it to AVICC first, or should it be a late resolution to AVICC?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. They probably won't allow it to go to UBCM without going to AVICC first. I can look into that and let you know, but usually that's where they won't allow us to put forward a resolution if it hasn't gone first to AVICC.
Okay, because we're not the only community that has this issue, particularly the more established communities. I know that City of North Vancouver and District North Vancouver, they have a real tough struggle trying to take development funds and put them into existing parks. It's all about new parks.
I will definitely look into it and report back to you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I like the idea. I would just suggest that perhaps we if you would wish to, make this a notice of motion and wordsmith and craft something to send, regardless of the fact that it should go to AVICC first or not. I think the sooner that we make our position well known on this subject matter, and if we're rejected at the UBCM because we didn't go through the AVICC, so be it. We'll do it. Then we'll do it again next year, and we'll keep doing it because, as they say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And if we just back off it, maybe we might not do it in a year from now, just for whatever reason. But I like the idea, and I think that we should proceed with it. And with the mayor's blessings, a notice of motion to create and wordsmith a motion to send to UBCM on this subject matter.
Ms. Gree.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Bestwick, I'll work with Mr. Lindsay on that and bring it forward to the next council meeting. The motion, as well as look into whether we can go to UBCM without going to AVICC.
So then Councillor Bestwick has essentially brought forward a notice of motion to bring it forward to the next meeting. Perfect, thank you. Ms. Armstrong? I'm sorry, Councillor Armstrong.
I'm just wondering why couldn't we not make it a late motion for the AVICC, because we have a month and a half before AVICC, and I think having sat through the last one that we went through, they absolutely refused to hear it without going through AVICC. So I think it would be wise to try and do a late motion to AVICC first.
So, Your Worship, that's kind of where I'm going. Whatever we can do, I'm going to work on doing, and I'll find out deadlines for both and bring forward a motion. I'll work with Dale on wording and bring it forward to you guys to see where it can go and what we can do.
Great, thank you very much. And council we should just make sure everybody's aware that there's only one council meeting in April, so we need to get it done PDQ. Thank you. Okay, so the next item is cross-connection control. I'm sure it's going to be a lively discussion. Mr. Bill Sims, Director of Engineering and Public Works, to provide council with the background and the rationale to establish for the establishment of a cross-connection control program. Mr. Sims, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. You've stolen my thunder on the purpose of the report and the purpose of the presentation, but I have with me this evening Mr. Paul Rosen, our Senior Manager of Engineering, to provide council with a brief presentation on what a cross-connection control program is, where it came from, why we need it, and for council's consideration this evening are the first three readings of a cross-connection control bylaw and Mr. Rosen will take it from here, and we're both here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Cross-connection control. It's a bit of an obscure term. Some of us might not have heard it before. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining what a cross-connection is. And then we'll talk a little bit about what some of the risk mitigation strategies are. And then we'll get into a little bit of the details around what the program is that we've developed. So what is a cross-connection? So the formal definition is that it's a connection to the water system that could, under certain circumstances, introduce objectionable or hazardous materials into the system. From a practical standpoint, I think we're all familiar with like a hose. You can see in the picture in the top right, there's a hose with a blue barrel, and there's some contaminated water in that barrel. Now, the example there is that the hose is down in the contaminated water, filling up the barrel. Now, what can happen is when the water main on the street, when the pressure drops on that main because of a water main break or like a fire suppression situation, or just from an operational standpoint of exercising valves and so on, the pressure can drop on the main on the street. And what can happen is if there's nothing protecting the system, you can get what's called back siphonage. So that's where the contaminated water in the barrel can actually work its way back into the mains on the street. And then eventually when the main is repressurized, that contaminated water can enter other service connections in the distribution system and contaminate other connections. So cross-connection is it's a well-documented phenomenon. We haven't had any incidences of cross-connection in the city that we're aware of. They are difficult to detect, and typically we would only be made aware of them through a complaint process or what have you. We are not aware of any that have occurred in Nanaimo, but certainly within BC, Canada, North America, there is many hundreds, probably thousands of documented cases of cross-connections that have caused health hazards. And so it's a well-documented phenomenon. In terms of how it applies to the city of Nanaimo, so when we opened up the water treatment plant, VHA issued us a revised interim operating permit that included a requirement to develop a cross-connection control program. So that's why we're here today, is because we're going through the process of developing that cross-connection control program. One way to think of it is, in simple terms, the city of Nanaimo provides safe, clean drinking water to the community, and we don't want that used water back. So that's a very sort of simple way to put it, but that's essentially what it is. So the way we deal with this cross-connection risk is through a backflow prevention device. Now, with that example with the blue barrel and the red hose, a simple way to have dealt with that problem would be to create an air gap. So to take the hose actually out of the water, creates an air gap. So when there's that back siphonage effect, there's no ability for it to pull that contaminated water back into the mains. So many of our fixtures in our house are set up like that, like in our kitchen and our bathroom. We've got the faucets are above the flood level of the sinks and so on. So it creates that air gap. So it's a pretty standard way of doing it in many cases. It's not always possible or practical to do that. So for many cases, it's necessary to install a backflow prevention device. So the image you have in front of you there, it's taken from a warmer climate where you can actually have water apparatus like this out exposed to the atmosphere. But the reason I chose that one is so you can actually see it. In Nanaimo, a similar setup like that would have to be in a buried vault under the ground, insulated, and so on. Essentially, what it is, it's a one-way valve. It only allows water to go into the property, and it doesn't allow it to return back. So the example of the image to the right with the cross section of the blue water and the inlet, so the water will be able to come in through the valve. And then if the water main depressurizes on the street, that valve will close and it won't allow the water to return back to the street. So this is a typical setup. The one that you see there on the left, that would be for a larger installation like a commercial or an industrial property. Typically for residential, the valves are much, much smaller. They'd almost look like a small cylinder, And so there's different levels of protection, from simple check valves to very technically sophisticated, very complex valves that are meant for high-risk applications. So some of the key steps that we've taken in development of the program to date are we initially engaged a specialist consultant that is an expert in helping municipalities implement a cross-connection control program. This particular consultant has done the same thing for many municipalities around BC. In fact, Nanaimo is one of the, I wouldn't say we're one of the last communities to adopt a cross-connection control program, but certainly most of the other communities that I'm aware have already got one in place. So that was our first step, was to engage with that consultant, develop a strategy for staff to follow, as well as help us draft the bylaw. This consultant was able to use their experience with other municipalities and help us work through some of the sort of the pain points with implementing a program like this. One of the things that we did fairly early on in the development of this is we had a look at like city facilities and what impact a bylaw like this would have on our own city facilities. So there's two reasons for that. One was to get a good sense for what the costs would be. So when we impose these requirements on the private sector, on business and institutions and so on, we wanted to get a good sense for what those costs were likely to be. And the second reason was, if we're going to have a bylaw like this, we should get our house in order first and make that a priority. So we reviewed city facilities. We've done the review. We haven't actually completed the upgrades yet. Those are being budgeted for next year and will be tackled on a risk-based process. The budget for the cross-connection control program has already been established. It's already included in the financial plan. It's about $130,000 a year. It's ongoing, and most of that cost is for one FTE for a position that would be called the cross-connection control coordinator. And their job would be to conduct inspections, to manage the paperwork, maintain the database, and it's an ongoing process. We have upwards of 30,000 service connections in the city, so there's a lot of work there. As part of the process, we took the proposed bylaw and the strategy to the Engineering and Public Works Committee last summer. It was reviewed in depth. There was a presentation by the consultant, and there was a few recommendations that the committee made to the bylaw. We have since made some revisions to address those concerns, and the draft bylaw that you have in front of you tonight includes those revisions. So the next step in the process of implementing the cross-connection control program will be for council to adopt the bylaw. And so that's what we're here for tonight. So in terms of cross-connection hazard levels, so CSA, Canadian Standards Association, has a standard on cross-connection, and they look at 3 levels of severity or hazard level for cross-connection. The most severe would be cross-connections that have the risk to cause illness or death if a cross-connection event were to occur. So institutions like hospitals or medical facilities. If you think about an industrial setting where you have chemical make-down tanks, agriculture where they're diluting herbicides, pesticides, those types of things. Cooling towers, car wash, those are generally considered the highest hazard or severe. Moderate level, that's potentially where the risk of a cross-connection is mostly around an objectionable aesthetic issue with the contamination. So things like hotels, an irrigation without any chemical make or any chemical addition, like a hot tub or like a fire suppression system that uses the domestic water supply. They're more of a moderate risk. And then there aren't a lot of them, but the low-risk hazards are like residential is fairly typically low risk, although there are some situations in residential that can be higher than low. So that gives a sense for some examples about what the different risks are. These are a list of the City of Nanaimo facilities that we actually looked at. This took the experienced inspector 1 week to conduct these inspections. They went in and they took a look at what the cross-connections were, what the potential solutions would be. This list is actually ranked based on the price for the remedial action. So with Beban Pool, for example, that's about a $50,000 price tag, and that one, for example, would be what we would call premise isolation. So that's where the entire facility would be protected with one of these backflow prevention devices. And because it's such a large facility, it's a large diameter pipe, that's what drives the cost up. The less expensive ones, those would be ones that could be addressed through some fairly minor plumbing modifications. So what we expect is when we start conducting inspections on the institutional, the commercial, the industrial sector, these are the types of costs we're going to start to see. And these costs would have to be borne by the private property owner to make these corrections. So what does cross-connection control mean to the average homeowner? So as you would recall the slide that showed that residential properties tend to be lower risk, our primary focus would be, at least initially, would be education. Educate people about, remember the blue barrel with the red hose? Educate them that when they're filling up their pool or something like that, that they don't put the hose in the water, that they leave an air gap. So that would be part of it. With new residential, there is already a requirement in the building code to provide a check valve in the home. So that part of it's covered off. It's mostly the older homes that would have an existing issue. Any in-ground irrigation systems would go through a plumbing permit process, and they would require a backflow prevention device. So as I mentioned, we have close to 30,000 service connections in the city, and we have what's called a universal water metering program. So that means every service connection has a water meter on it. The majority of those water meters were installed back when the program was initiated in the mid-'80s, I believe it is. And the typical lifespan for a water meter is typically about 25 years. So we're getting fairly close to the point where we're going to start to need to replace a lot of water meters. So what we're actually envisioning for residential is, as part of that water meter changeout program, we would include potentially a check valve in the water meter assembly itself. But that wouldn't be immediate. It would probably be within the sort of the 5 to 10 year range that we would look at that. The one issue that does come up from that is that the older homes that have a hot water tank that doesn't have an expansion tank on, it's a little bit of a technical issue. But when cold water is heated up, it expands. So with older homes, that expanded water quite often will find its way back out towards the main on the street. And so when we put that check valve in at the meter, it won't be anywhere for it to go. So we'll have to work with the homeowners on an individual basis to make sure they've got that issue covered off before we actually install the check valve there. What does cross-connection control mean to institutional, commercial, and industrial properties? So with new developments, they're already required to install cross-connection control devices, backflow prevention devices on their fire suppression systems. So that is already addressed. With the existing ICI, institutional, commercial, industrial, we will inspect them and deal with them on a prioritization basis based on the severity of the risk. So, for example, we would target a car wash ahead of, like a pool or something. Now, one of the issues is that the costs for correcting these issues will be borne by the property owners, and they'll have to take action at their cost. And the other thing is, once these backflow prevention devices are installed and in place, they require ongoing maintenance to make sure that they're functioning and doing what they're intended to do. So they require annual testing. So what will be required is that the owner of this backflow device will be required to hire a qualified person every year to test it and to provide that inspection report to the city. So our cross-connection control coordinator, one of their roles will be actually to receive that paperwork, to send notices out, make sure we're getting those reports back from the inspectors and so on. So for our program for this year, the next steps we anticipate would be adoption of the bylaw to establish the program. Once that's in place, we would expect that we would hire the coordinator. We would conduct some rigorous staff training with the building inspectors, public works staff, engineering, all those staff that would need to be a part of that. To ensure that the bylaw is applied consistently and fairly, we would develop some staff procedures and also develop a database to collect and hold all the associated records for each service connection and backflow prevention device. And once we have the cross-connection control coordinator and inspector in place, we would start conducting inspections based on highest risk first, obviously. So the one important thing that I'd like council to think about is the potential for a cost-sharing program. So with when I showed you the list of costs for city facilities, there was quite a range there. You know, some businesses might be able to deal with that without too much difficulty. Depending on the situation, it could be more challenging for others. Some communities have developed cost-sharing or incentive programs. An example is Chilliwack. They have first come, first serve, 50% cost share up to a certain amount of money, and they have a certain budget, and first come, first serve. So we could do something similar if council is interested. So that was it for my presentation. We're more than interested in hearing questions and so on.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kipp.
Well, Oak Tree Manor, 2009, pointed out the cross-contamination, the stagnant water concern with about a 60-foot, 4-inch fire line that had no backflow on it. And it took almost till 2015 to get that fixed. But I'm really glad we're moving forward with this finally. Been working on cross-connection since 2009 with the city. There is no residential in this, really, in your bylaw. There's no residential. And the residential check valves, so there's no testable dual checks on any of our residential, is there? And that's what most communities have gone to, is from what I understand, my background. I sent out the BC Water and Waste and the Saanich stuff, I think it was 5 years ago. Their bylaws are totally different than what ours are. So I'm glad we're producing this. I'm glad we're getting it done. Ladysmith since 99, CRD since 2007, Tofino, Penticton 95, North Cowichan 93, RDN over 20 years this has been in place. I don't know why it's taken us so long to do this, because we've had complaints, we've had concerns. And so when I see annual testing coming in where the people are going to be responsible for annual testing, this is like a create work project versus putting in backflow protection. I'm not certain we need to have more staff on this. I really don't understand and why it's taken so long and why it is this. So we're not doing residential, we're just doing industrial. We have 28,000 residential connections, from what I understand, and they are a problem now with pools and things. So what about Oak Tree Manor? It got corrected, and I understand there could be 100 of those connections in the ground, is what I was understanding, that were put in the ground there. And I asked for that report, and I never got it. So is the Oak Tree Manor that was replaced, that had nothing on the fire line except the note on the plan put on by the city that stagnant water could be in the line, so it may be a moderate risk or a minor risk. But is there more of those in the ground now that someone has to put in because an engineer poorly designed it?
Your Worship, that particular condition with the live water or the stagnant water in the fire line service exists at every fire hydrant. And we had an assessment of Oak Tree Manor, and it wasn't a serious risk. It was repaired, but it was not a serious risk. It would be similar condition to many other locations of the several thousand hydrants we have around the city. So, so that's that one. And as far as the residential and the double check, as Paul noted, the program is risk-based. So the severe risks are the most important ones to deal with. Standard residential are a very low risk to the system because there's such little water there. There's often, unless underground irrigation or a pool, that's the potential. Those elevate to moderate. But so that's, as I say, it's a risk-based.
Follow-up. So the Oak Tree Manor, there's no more of those that were initially put in the ground back in 2008, 2009. There's no more of those in the ground, I hear. And the interesting one is when you explained today about pressure drop. Oak Tree's here, Victoria Crescent here, Crace Street, down to, Albert Street. And we had the theater running for about 2 weeks during the winter one time when a pressure drop downstream, outside of an old folks' home. That was my concern. And when I talked to Mr. Sexton from VHA, it took weeks and weeks and weeks to get my question answered. He'd gone back to staff. So I'm glad you're doing this. I wish you could get to residential. I wish we could catch up to our local communities who have been doing this for 20 years, but I'm happy you're doing it. I just find the fight when we bring things forward and the time lag and the delay in getting answers for me is really frustrating, extremely frustrating. So I will continue on my concerns with what other ones exist in the ground. I'm not going to stop because this program's getting in place. And I was told in 2015 we had this going. It's in our report from Mr. Jeff Goodall that the program was up and running and they were going at it. And now, almost 3 years later, I find that we're starting. That's a real concern. And I know Mr. Goodall's gone, but this is concerning. This is our water system. There's nothing more important than our water. Nothing. Without water, there's no development, there's nothing. There's no life, there's nothing. And so for me, this should have been implemented a long time ago. I'm happy that we're doing it now, but it's like emergency management. Once it hits the ground, we'll see how bad it gets. Thank you.
Thank you. So until such time as a motion comes to the floor for first reading, I would ask the councillors stated questions of the presenters. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, thank you, Mr. Rosen and Mr. Sims. I'm certainly glad that this is moving forward and we're catching up to other communities. I do have a couple of questions. My first one is the bottom of the first page in our agenda in your report. Bullet number 2 says aspects of the program include establishing requirements to address cross-connection risks that are identified on public and private premises. And I'm wondering how those risks would be brought to our attention. How would we identify those?
So the way we would find out about those risks would be through inspections generally. So when I mentioned before that we did some inspections on 20 city facilities, similar types of inspections would be required on private and other public premises. And those inspections typically are completed by an expert in cross-connection control that can identify them and can develop solutions on the spot for dealing with them. And that position that we're talking about filling would be that person that would do that work.
All right, thank you. And if I may, a second related question, because you're talking about inspections, and you mentioned annual inspections for commercial properties, I believe, where the business would have to hire an expert to do the inspection. I'm wondering if this, and I know this isn't tonight's discussion, but I'm wondering if this might be something that would be a city inspection and in fact could be related to issuing or renewal of business licenses. So again, I don't expect really an answer to that, but I just throw that out there.
Sorry, maybe I should clarify. So they're not annual inspections, it's annual testing of the backflow prevention device. And so those are the devices that would already exist within a premises. They're owned by the private property owner. All the city does is we require an annual testing report on that device, just to make sure that they're maintaining it and keeping it operational. So the onus is on the private owner to go and engage with a plumbing contractor or a qualified professional to conduct that annual test and then send the report back to the city.
Thank you. And my only point was that the city needs to be assured that that has happened and those are being done annually. All right, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you. Through yourself, Chair, to staff. It says in our report of the consultant 8.3 in the key messaging that it is legislated by law. Is that correct? Cross-control check?
It's required by VHA, having amended our operating permit. So that's the same as
Okay,
amending
so
it by
is
law.
there any penalty or time frame that we have to have this done by? And if we don't have it done by a certain time, is there a penalty? Thank you.
At this point, Your Worship, Island Health has been focused on getting communities on the island up to the new surface water treatment rule, hence the water treatment plant. And the next stage that they implement is something like this, a cross-connection control program, to sort of once you've got the water in wonderful shape, you want to be able to protect that quality within the city's distribution system. So does that answer the question?
I'm just wondering, is there a time frame that has to be?
Oh, I'm sorry. Right, I'm sorry. No, there is, at this point, there's not. The Island Health is working with the municipalities to say what works for you. And essentially what our operating permit says is to develop a cross-connection control program. That's what we started under Mr. Goodall in 2015. And at this point, they're not holding us to any particular time. They just want to see us moving.
Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rosen. Long overdue and happy to see this taking shape. Page 89, I won't get into the minutia and all the technical stuff, but you are asking us to approve this tonight. And on page 89, it's the schedule, the fine schedule. And in one of your slides, you indicated high risk, medium risk, and low risk. And with the 6 identified offenses that somebody, business or otherwise, may be subject to a fine for noncompliance, I would prefer to see, not unlike many of our bylaws that have sort of a fine that you go, okay, well, it's a fine, but I'm okay with it if for the offense. So when I hear high, moderate, and low, from my point of view, I think the high risk should be subject to a higher fine. And the medium risk, for the same offense, or what, medium and low. When I read like $200, it's kind of like the pot shops that are operating illegally. We're going to fine you $500 a day. That's fine. We're making $7,000. Okay. So I would just like to see us put fines that are meaningful. And it's not punitive. It's if you know what if we're just starting now, then I think that it should be well known that you need to comply. And if you're a large facility with large risk, high risk, we're coming after you first, so to speak. And I don't mean to, and so for $500, is that $500 a day? So when we're doing this, I don't see a P/day beside that, unless section 7.3 says per day.
If you look at the top of the page, it says daily fine.
Schedule A fine schedule?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Bestwick, right? There's the description of offense, and then it says section, and then it says daily fine. So right across the top of the table, there's 3 columns.
Is that online?
And then could you point to where it says daily fine?
Daily fine.
Yeah.
Terrific. My sincere apologies. But I would still like to see you make that $1,500 for the large facilities, then $1,000, then $500 a day. Thank you. Sorry.
Councillor Yocum.
Thank you.
I can't say I'm sorry.
Thank you. Through yourself to staff, is there a history? Do you have any data to verify or support Island Health's concern around cross-contamination? Is my first question.
So as I mentioned in my presentation, we don't have any documented incidences of cross-connections in the city of Nanaimo. However, they are very difficult they're not something that we would normally become aware of unless there was a complaint and we were made aware of it through a complaint process typically. They are a well-documented phenomenon though, and just because we haven't received a complaint and we're aware of one doesn't mean they haven't occurred in the city.
Okay, so the reason I bring that up is nothing to do with you two gentlemen, is Island Health we're in this conversation for $85 million plus because of the direction. So now I'm just concerned that this is going to be big cost to the private business, commercial and industry. So if there's no data verifying this cross-contamination issue, which I'm all protecting water, don't get me wrong, but nevertheless, if Island Health's directing this, mandating this, I sure hope they're going to do grants and help fund this project, because it's going to come up to owners of all these businesses with no data saying, well, I've never had the cross-contamination in my history. So that's a concern, and I'm not debating with you two. I just want to just raise some points here of concern of Island Health always saying, do this and do that, and it costs the working people endless amounts of money, just like this water treatment plant we built. So that's a concern I have. And also, about the inspection, which you touched on. We're responsible for inspecting it, so that's more cost to the city. And installation is going to come to the owner. So do we have a ballpark cost? What's going to cost the individual owners? I hear they're going to be responsible. Do we know ballpark what this project's going to cost each business?
So through your worship to Councillor Yoakum, so that list of city facilities that we looked at, the 20 city facilities,
Yeah.
maybe I can go back there. Or no, sorry, I don't have it open anymore. But there was 20 city facilities that we looked at, and the costs ranged from $100, which was some minor plumbing modifications, all the way to a very large complex facility of the Bevan complex, which was $50,000. So most of the facilities that will require some sort of remediation work, they're at the lower end of the spectrum. Probably in the $1,000 to $2,000 range would be pretty typical for many. There will be some that are a lot more that'll require premises isolation in the $20,000 to $40,000 range, but hopefully they're few and far between. One thing I would like to point out though is other communities that have adopted a cross-connection control bylaw and a program, some communities have taken a pure premises isolation approach, and that's where every property or location they come across, they require premises isolation, which is at the higher end of the cost spectrum. The bylaw, as we've drafted it, it provides quite a bit of latitude to the inspectors to require plumbing modifications and to deal with the cross-connection issue on the actual premise to meet the intention of the cross-connection control program while minimizing the cost to the private property owner. So we've developed a bylaw that hopefully balances that and achieves the intended result with the lowest possible impact and cost on the private sector.
Okay, just to wrap up. So, and again, this isn't that you two gentlemen doing a great job. We've got the best water in the world, but nevertheless, and we want to protect that. But that column on the right is the city-owned facilities, which cost the taxpayers. So the private people are going to be paying similar amounts. Again, with no data. And that's a big price tag to put on a working person or a taxpayer with no data. Again, my concern, hopefully we can write a letter to Island Health saying, are you guys going to help offset this cost that you're putting on the backs of the people of the city and the taxpayers? So that's a concern I have because I have a feeling, my intuition would be, this will funnel into also residential. I know it's not on the table today, but it probably will funnel into residential. It's going to be more cost from Island Health mandate without cost for this. I see the need and importance of it down the road. I wish I had the data to show it, but nevertheless, the taxpayers are going to bear this from the Island Health mandate. And this is not you two again. I'm being repetitive there. So I hope we can write a letter saying, help chip in, pay for this, offset it, cost share, because I don't know, it's hard to support something, good initiative, but without the proof. Where are the horror stories of contaminated water? That's what if it was in front of us. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Hong.
Thank you. Through you to staff. Just a couple of questions. First, we're not doing residential, right? Do we know when we're going to do residential? Yeah. That's the first question.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Hong's question, eventually we'll get to the residential. They're at the low hazard, and that will be, as Mr. Rosen mentioned, that will be part of a rollout 5 to 10 years from now when we do a massive change out of our water meter systems. So that will be the opportunity at that point to put in some sort of cross connection.
Okay, thank you. And then just to follow up on I guess one staff member doing all this work, because how many businesses do we have? If that took a week to do, the 20 facilities for inspection, and that's what you're saying is we have to send this one person that we hire to inspect every facility to give them a price on what they're going to put in. I don't know how many businesses we have with 1,000 conservatively buildings that might need to be inspected. So you do that 20 a week, he gets 1,000 a year. That's going to be 2 years before he actually gets around to doing it, plus the work that he's going to have to do because we're sending in reports every year. So I understand that this is going to be a real gradual rollout for a lot of the businesses and everybody else. I wanted to make that clear. So this isn't going to happen because those fines are what people seem to see. So until can I safe to assume that until this person comes knocking on my business, I'm okay? Is that a safe assumption? Do I need to go call my plumber right now and tell him to put one in right now before he gets to my door, or can I wait till this inspector knocks on my door before I'm in trouble?
Your Worship, Councillor Hong raises an excellent point. I think we've got about 1,700 commercial institutional meters, which is a fair number. However, not all of those will be severe hazard. So one of the first things that the Cross Connection Control Coordinator, that's 4Cs, will be looking at is just determining which are the hazards and doing basic drive-bys and pulling relatively recent building permit files to make sure that the things are covered. That's sort of the work. That's one approach, is to say, if nobody's knocking on my door, I don't have a problem. And likewise, businesses are going to be able to say, well, how come you're picking on my neighbor and you're not picking on that other guy over there? So that's something that we'll have to deal with as the program rolls out. Those are questions that we'll work on for sure.
Great. And then just follow up on a couple others is, how well are these valves? I'm assuming that if, an annual inspection of these valves, is that a little excessive? Can it be done every 2 years? A safe bet to say for businesses to offset the cost. If we're not going to help them with some of these costs, we're going to say, well, we won't make you do it every year for an inspection to pay for the plumber to come in. At this point, we'll do every 2-year inspection. Is that a safe bet, or standard we should stick it to 1 year? That's another question.
Your Worship, the standard is definitely sticking it to 1 year. It's similar to calling in a business to inspect your fire extinguishers. So you do that on an annual basis. Otherwise, you can't guarantee that the fire extinguisher will work when you need it to. And that's a very similar condition here.
I would add that a lot of businesses that have fire suppression systems already have backflow prevention devices installed within their premises, and they, as part of their insurance and so on, they do already have annual inspections that they're conducting on them.
Yes, and that was the other point I wanted to make, was if it was possible to let the fire department to do this paperwork and submit it, because that's what they pretty much do anyways, unless you find a deficiency from the fire department. They come and they do inspect all of these things, so getting them to inspect the check valve, all you need is that tag, exactly what you said, is to make sure that there is a tag, because that's all they do. I see Chief Fry shaking her head. But they just look for the tag, and they don't do anything else. It's not like they need to be professional. Instead of sending this person out to send it to somebody else, having the fire department do all one thing, just checking for that tag seems to be logistically a bit better for the amount of people that are coming in and out of buildings, and business owners sending these reports to here and there and so forth. So that's just a comment. Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Councillor Yoakum mentioned Island Health. I'm glad he did. We paid, when Island Health came out with their new guidelines around water purification, we had some of the best water in BC prior to this.
Do you have a question for the members of staff?
It's coming. It's coming, please. Thank you. I find it really irritating that when
Councillor, do you have a question?
Mr. Mayor, when other people have a preamble, you say nothing. But
Councillor,
with
do you have a
me,
question?
you routinely do. So I would appreciate it if you allow me to go through. So with the Island Health thing, we paid $85 million to have some of the best water in the province, which we had prior to the $85 million, some of the best water in the province. I don't know if these things are good things or bad things. I think you're doing a great job on what you're doing and what we're being required to do by the province. Quick question with regards to the numbers here. Mafia Sutton Park, $0 for materials and $900 for labor. There's a couple of those. I'm just curious how that works with no materials, but still got the labor.
Through your worship, Councillor Fuller. So the remedial action here sometimes requires some bits and bobs or plumbing parts to be modified. In some cases, it just requires some labor to modify the existing plumbing. So the case where Maffeo Sutton Park doesn't have any materials, that would be a case where a plumber just has to come in and make some changes.
Thank you.
Before I get to second-time questions, I'd like to ask a couple of questions myself. First one is, if a water meter requires replacement, what will happen? So if the meter determines that my meter is not working properly and I need to get a new one, will backflow be added at that time?
Are you envisioning a residential setting or an
Correct.
ICI setting? Residential?
Yes.
So currently, we don't have check valves on residential. In the future, what we were talking about is a fairly large-scale water meter replacement program. As part of that program, we're contemplating whether or not we should be installing what's called a meter setter. And so that's another component that the meter would sit on, and you can include a check valve and various valves as part of that setter system. So right now we don't require it. In the future, it may be part of the work that we do when we replace water meters.
Supplemental, and that is, what happens if someone's looking at a new hot water tank today? Should they be installing a pressure tank?
I would suggest they would need to follow the plumbing code and take out a plumbing permit for the work that they're doing there, and it may require a pressure tank to be installed, but I'm not an expert at that, but I would leave that to the plumbing department.
I guess why I'm asking the question is in anticipation that there's going to be a backflow valve installed somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years.
I would suggest an expansion tank would be a good measure of insurance against having overpressurization in an internal plumbing system. Until such time that there's a check valve, it wouldn't do much, though.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
Well, thank you very much. On the risk assessment, residential's low, but residential is like 43% of our output of water in the city. It's 70% of our metering. 77% of our metering. So does that increase? Like, I mean, when you say one-off, a house is not as bad as stagnant water outside of an old folks home. So you can fix all the old folks homes. But commercial residential is 7% of our total meters, 0.7% of our total meters, 179. Government's 150. Municipal's 160. The other is 1,100 meters. Residential multi is 3,856, and residential in 19,279, and this is a 2013 report. We've added about 300 houses or so a year since 2014. But this is, so the minimal risk and typical risk calculation is how often it's going to happen, right? Like, and what is it catastrophic? Is it minor? Is it a negligible effect? So if 77% of our meters are 43% of our water and residential multi is 27% of our water output, that puts us way up to over 60% of our water flow is coming from a low risk of backflow and not going to be fixed in 10, and you say 5 to 10, but it's taken 5 years to get here. So it's going to take a lot longer to get that. So is that not an increased risk by the propensity for an error in a high percentage? Because probability plays into risk assessment. Probability is a big part of risk assessment.
So risk is typically quantified based on probability and consequences. Mm-hmm. So on the residential side of it, the consequences are generally assumed to be lower. Obviously, the probability side of it would be higher given there's so many of them. Mm-hmm. However, when we start a program like this, we only have a finite amount of inspection capacity. So the inspector will initially tackle the more high risk, the severe, and the moderate first. As we feel we have addressed those, we would move on to the residential in succession. So that would be the game plan.
So we didn't look at probability based on propensity for an increased number. So that's fine with that. And now for domestic hot water, anybody should replace it with a demand hot water. They shouldn't have a hot water tank sitting there anymore burning. So if we switch to more demand hot water, that reduces the hot water concern of back pressure, backflow. Am I correct? That is, yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate that you're doing it. You know, I'm just frustrated by this for a decade.
Thank you very much. So, Councillor Yoakum.
Motion that cross connection control bylaw 2018 number 7249 to operate and maintain a municipal water system cross-connection control program, pass first reading.
Moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Hong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion that cross-connection bylaw 2018 number 7249 pass second reading.
Moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Hong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Motion that cross-connection bylaw 2018 number 7249 pass third reading.
Moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Hong. Discussion. Councillor Kipp.
Do we ever look at something like this because it's an interesting bylaw with some financial implications to the public? Do we ever go to a public hearing on this type of information, or just an information session? Because we're adjusting fees, we're adjusting, a whole bunch of things. We never go to public hearing on that, do we?
That's correct. I think there's this opportunity, this forum for the public to have input or to learn about this bylaw, and as well the Engineering and Public Works Committee, which occurred last summer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the appointment of screening officers. And it's to be introduced by Ms. Karen Fry, the Fire Chief and Director of Public Safety.
Thank you. So this report is in relation to the Nanaimo bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, which is really the adjudication process where community members or complainants, instead of going to court, they can resolve a bylaw ticket through an adjudication process, freeing up time. One of 50 communities in the province that does this currently. As part of the Local Government Bylaw Notice Enforcement Act, Council may appoint screening officers. And I know one of the questions would be, well, why do we need a screening officer? We've had various retirements and vacancies in the bylaw division, so we now have 2 new staff and some of the duties and functions of a screening officer, they inform the complainant about what the bylaw is, what the facts of the bylaw, the penalties, the opportunities to enter into a compliance agreement, opportunity to proceed to an adjudication system. They also communicate with the person, with the bylaw enforcement officers, and any other staff or reports or records regarding the disputant's history of compliance. And they can also cancel the bylaw notices as well. So saying that, we have 2 staff that we are looking to have appointed as screening officers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Beswick.
Thank you, Mr. Fry. This is a housekeeping matter without financial implications. Is that correct?
Sorry, no financial implications.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Is there someone prepared to move the motion? Moved by Councillor Beswick, seconded by Councillor Hong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is the appointment of bylaw enforcement officers. Again, to be introduced by Ms. Karen Fry, Fire Chief. Ms. Fry.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So again, the City of Nanaimo, we have contracted with Nanaimo Animal Control Services to provide our animal control to the City of Nanaimo. And as such, they have a new employee, and in order for that employee to provide bylaw enforcement, he needs to be appointed by council.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beswick.
Move the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Beswick, seconded by Councillor Hong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next item, bylaws with no accompanying report, and the first one is highway closure and dedication removal, a portion of Kentwood Way, adjacent to 893 Kentwood Way, bylaw 2018, number 7254. Councillor Yocum.
Motion that highway closure and dedication removal, a portion of Kentwood Way adjacent to 893 Kentwood Way, bylaw 2018, number 7254 be adopted.
Second. Moved by Councillor Yocum, seconded by Councillor Hong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next one is request from Councillor Yocum, reconsideration of development variance permit application number DVP 335 at 191 King Road. So we're going to be determining tonight whether to reconsider the matter. We will not be voting on it tonight because it's a bylaw change through a development variance permit. We must give notice to the residents. Yep. So it must follow the notice period. So, Councillor Yocum.
Thank you. I'd like to request consideration of development various permit number DVP 335-191 King Road.
Thank you. And is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kipp. Is there any discussion with respect to the reconsideration? Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Am I entitled to ask the mover or seconder why the matter is being reconsidered?
Councillor Yocum.
Just briefly, I was able to educate myself a bit more on the subject, and I'd like to. I'm speaking for myself and have a different lens of educating myself a little more on the subject. Yeah.
Councillor Hong.
Thank you. If I'm not mistaken, this one, again, was what we did earlier. Is that correct, Mr. Lindsay? An extension of development variance permit. This is the lot by Calder Hill that's sold. And then just wanted an extension.
That is correct. It's very similar, I think, to the file you're referring to earlier this evening, where there was a previous rezoning and development variance permit, and they are now interested in proceeding with the subdivision.
But we have no new information from what we voted on last time. Is that correct?
No.
So for us to bring this back, do we need new information to reconsider? Or I don't know how I'm going to change my mind. I just would like some information.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Council. No, you don't need any more information. The reconsideration motion is a change of heart motion, and it can be brought forward by any member of Council that was on the affirmative side, the winning side of the vote, and or any councillor that was absent from the vote. So no, there's no reason or need for additional information for it to be brought forward.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. I'll support the request for reconsideration because I think that's a courtesy that we normally grant, but I want to be clear through you to Ms. Gurry that we are in fact not allowed to consider any additional information. Is that correct?
That's right. Thank you, Worship.
You're on.
Okay. Through you to Councillor Thorpe. Yes, you can actually reconsider anything from. It is a change of heart motion. It is, if you have learned something new or educated yourself or had a change of heart, you can get information. We shouldn't have the person come here and present their case. It is the same information you considered the first time, but it's because you've learned something new, either by educating yourself further or learning something that you didn't know before. So no, it shouldn't be presented to you in front of council, but yeah, that's the reason it's called the change of heart motion. You've had a change of heart, or you've reconsidered it, or want an opportunity to.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Show Councillors Bestwick and Hong opposed. Motion carries. Next item is 16B, and that is my motion with respect to a letter to Minister Selina Robinson. And I essentially am asking the motion to read something along the lines of, to have the mayor send a letter on behalf of Mayor, Council, and the citizens of Nanaimo to request an extension to the time frame in order to complete the modular housing project as envisioned in the city of Nanaimo.
Second.
Thank you very much. So it's been moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Yocum. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we move on at 8:40 p.m. to question period.
Motion adjourned.
Thank you very much. So we have two signed up. Pat McGee. With respect to the agenda item on backflow valves. Mr. Sims.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening, Mr.
Pat
Meady.
McGee, Nanaimo. Regarding backflow valves on private dwellings homes for the outside taps, are those required at present on dwellings or not?
No.
Because that actually is a high risk if you stop and think about it in the summertime. When people are fertilizing their yards and stuff like that, they hook up their tap and they put in a little barrel or whatever they're using. And quite often they don't drain that afterwards. They just drop it on the ground and away they go. And there's a real threat of a backflow at that time. And it's only $19 or something for a backflow valve. I was quite surprised that they're not required at this time.
Right, Your Worship, that's, the delegations pointed out a very good example of a cross-connection control. And they're easily repairable. They're easily added in just a small valve on the bottom of your hose bib. And that's part of the education process that Mr. Rosen referred to.
So hopefully there'll be, when these valves do come into place, that there'll be workshops or community information.
Absolutely.
So people will understand what risk they're putting themselves and their neighbors at without these backflow valves.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent example. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, question period is Deanna Nezevici. Am I close? Or is it right? It's even close.
Not close.
Not even close.
Knezevich.
Knezevich?
Knezevich.
So you have to put a little thing across your
You say the
H.
whole thing. The K is pronounced. It's not like a knife. I am the property owner of
Can we
5341
get your
Dunster Road.
place? Okay, very good.
Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Yeah. And my apologies, through lack of knowledge, I wasn't aware that I had to get up and speak for the agenda item. I have no intentions of selling the property, as what was mentioned. I've owned the property since 2001. I did receive my original variance in April of 2012, which carried a 2-year expiry date to April 16th of 2014. In May of 2012, after I received the variance, due to unforeseen circumstances, my grandmother had come down with cancer and I became her primary caregiver. So
Do you have a question for us?
yeah, because it was mentioned by Councillor that they were only going to consider the 1 year.
No, we didn't.
The 1 year extent, or in the future.
We pay no attention to him most of the time. Sorry.
So I just wanted to mention that the reason it wasn't let lapse for ignorance, it was for a reason, and now I've come to this stage that I want to get the 2 years variance so that I can move forward with the project.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hong.
Thank you for coming. That's all we needed. This is the reason why these things relapse. So appreciate that.
Okay, so do I have to come to another meeting for this? No? Okay, thank you
You're
very
good to
much.
go. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Bestwick, seconded by Councillor Hong. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Really?